is C.R. Gibbs. The topic tonight is called Emancipation, USA. It's how freedom came to the DMV and Juneteenth came to Texas. So that's it. And of course, when we talk about emancipation, yes, we're talking about the bestowing of legal freedom on a class of people that did not have it before. And when we talk about the African American experience, we're talking about folk who were legal chattel and are not after the process of emancipation. And but the history goes back, and that's the important thing, because I really would rather not have to hear somebody get it wrong. And it was emancipation is a process. It didn't happen all at once, all across the nation at the same time. You could not set your watch by it because, as you'll find out, this was a process that it was sweeping and at the same time tardy. It was ragged. Again, did not occur at the same time in the same place all across the country. So we'll go ahead and chronicle that, but it is important that we acknowledge that it isn't and wasn't a simple process. It is not and was not a simple process. We begin at the beginning of the March for Freedom in terms of federal power, which began in the nation's capital. We're looking here at a slave coffle. Those of you who already know that this is a picture actually drawn from real life, And these people, again, this is Washington, D.C. in the early 1800s. Many of you are already thinking, well, how do you know it's D.C.? And who were the folks that were looking at this and not doing anything about it as it occurred? These men, women, and children were passing Capitol Square. The U.S. Capitol is in the background. And again, immediately you're going to say, wait a minute, Gibbs, I've never seen the Capitol look like that. Well, you would have if you caught it somewhere about 1819 or so. In other words, when both wings of the Capitol building had been put up, but not yet for the Capitol dome. And it happened during a debate on the impact of enslavement in the United States. One place that you can find it is in the white poet William Cullen Bryant's book, A Popular History of the United States. So this was something that occurred regularly in the nation's capital. And because it was in their face every day, it was hard for the senators and congressmen to ignore it or claim it lacked importance when they could see the social, political, and economic consequences of enslavement in front of their primary place of employment. DC, as some of you may not know, of course, comes from land that came from Maryland and Virginia. And here in the top map, you get a sense of what that arrangement looked like. And as reference points, we have on the left-hand side, we have Georgetown and the C&O Canal. On the right-hand side, we have the borderline, and we have the Maryland good city of Bladensburg, originally known as Garrison's Landing. As we come down to the second image, again, we get another chance to see that before there was a DC, there was a Virginia, and there was a part of Maryland, a good chunk of which we call Prince George's County. But after 1790, after certainly the Act of 1790, and things became clearer, they began to understand that there would be a part of Maryland, certainly, and a part of Virginia, Alexandria primarily, that would become a portion of the nation's capital. And this was already slave land. So what you're looking at are the more than 20 slave pens, slave places, slave labor camps that would come to be incorporated in the new capital of the United States of America. As usual, we won't take too many examples, but I would encourage you to look at the center part of the map where I've highlighted it. And in the center, it'll say resurvey on part of Beale's levels, and you'll see Burns. Okay? And that's those pieces of land were owned by David Burns. David Burns. You'll know where his plantation was if you're at all familiar with the backside of the Washington Monument. David Burns, as near as I can tell, owned about 12 enslaved people. He was known to be a penurious Scotsman. That is to say, y'all, he was cheap and he worked his black folk hard. The land below Goose Creek or Tiber Creek, which will one day soon be called, I'm sure you a Tiber Creek, because Goose just didn't sound grandiloquent enough. And then we come across the creek, and now we're encroaching on what would become the mall. Part of that land, a plat of which was called Cerne Abbey Manor, was owned by Daniel Carroll of Duddington. And below that, we see a portion of land owned by Notley Young. And those of you who have gone down to the DC Wharf and you bought yourself some seafood down that way, all of that was owned by Notley Young. He was the largest owner of enslaved Africans in the early days uh, of the city. And we're talking about in excess of 200. He also owned some in Maryland as well. If we had in our time traveling rocket ships and we went to the right of Young's property, you would see New Troy, another plat of land called New Troy, later the site of the Capitol. That portion was owned by Daniel Carroll of Duddington. That was the name of his plantation. Again, if you have nothing else to do one day, hop on the Metro, go to Capitol South. There's only one way in and one way out of that Metro station. As you come up out of Capitol South, hook a right. As soon as you see the sidewalk, walk ahead about 3 blocks and you will see a brick building. That's the old Capitol Page's residence. If you were to step up on the first step and look diagonally across the street, you will see a street sign that says Duddington Place. And that would put you right where the Duddington plantation stood for so many years. So we're getting a sense of what it was like. There are more places like that, not on this map, is the Maples, but we'll catch up with that place in the narrative as we go along. At the bottom illustration, we have the site of the Notley Young house. And to give you a more modern appreciation for where it stood, you can see that on the map, you see site of Notley Young's house, and then below that, you see Main Avenue. Most everyone knows that that is the heart of Washington's Wharf and Seafood District. And this was that hill. Right across from Main Avenue, right on the wharf, the site of the wharf, and on the above the Main Avenue would have stood the house of Notley Young. To give you a better appreciation for it, let's take a look at the first illustration on the top. This would be the view of the Notley Young plantation as a 1790 traveler came up the Potomac to Georgetown, but they would pass this way first. Currently, the camera is on Ohio Drive in Potomac Park, but in 1790, it would have been on a boat in the river. Notley Young's mansion has been described as painted white or yellow brick or red brick. And this, what you're looking at, is a computer simulation, but you get a sense of what it must have been like had you been on the river on a small boat or skiff sailing up the river on your way to Georgetown. Notley Young could look out of his mansion. This is what you're looking at in the second image. They call it, they say, view from Banneker Park. Well, yes and no. If you go to Banneker Fountain, you'd get a better sense of what the view was like. And remember, Banneker Fountain is the place that from which you would view, that's part of that hill that overlooks the DC Wharf. If you go up there today, there is a fountain dedicated to Benjamin Banneker, a contemporary of that time, although it seldom seems to spurt water these days. And how do we know where this was? Because of the bottom illustration. This is a map drawn by Nicholas Young, and it shows us the house of Notley Young, and some of the small outbuildings are the slave houses and places for farm animals and other things. Many of the local slave owners realized that as the city took shape, they can make money leasing out their enslaved workers. And so this is what they did. And so we know that slave labor helped to build the Capitol and the White House. And here are some, as they used to say, receipts for it. So above, a 1795 handwritten receipt for the hire of Negro Peter from 1st of July to 1st of October, received $15. Middleton Belt was an overseer of laborers at the Capitol, slave owner, and one-time resident of Georgetown. Below is a receipt for the hire of Negroes Abram and Charles from 1st September to 1st October 1795 for works at the Capitol. Both enslaved men on the bottom receipt were owned by a man named James Hollingshead. Most of these people were local slave owners. If in our time traveling device, we came down a little bit further, down to 7th and Pennsylvania Avenue, well, we pretty much have the same thing. We'd have the growing market, we'd have the importance of the slave trade, and the importance of local farming. It won't be for some time yet that this building that you see here, the National Archives, the stone container for the Bill of Rights, the DC Act of Emancipation, the Constitution, and so forth, is going to take shape. But in its early days, it is the site of the Marsh Market, the Marsh Market. And so they sold livestock and Black folk there in its early days. Here's an image a few years before the Center Market or Marsh Market is torn down. You have to understand that in many ways, the battle against enslavement, the battle on behalf of emancipation, starts in the nation's capital. In the nation's capital. And so its newspapers dripped ads like what you see here. Negroes wanted. The subscriber wishes to purchase from 40 to 50 Negroes of both sexes from age of 12 years to 25. He will exchange two-story brick houses on 7th Street West in the business part of the city for Negroes, or give the highest cash price. Persons disposed to sell We'll call it my residence on 9th Street West near E. That would be 9th and E, near the corner of 9th and E today. Or at Richard Henley's Tavern opposite the General Post Office, Gilson, Doug. It won't be long before Washington, D.C. is called the slave market of America. Not because it was the largest, but because the trade went on in an unabashed, unapologetic openness that shamed certainly foreign visitors and national or local abolitionists. There just seemed to be no end to the slave power and its ability to twist the local government as well as the government of the neighboring states to do whatever it would to extend the slave power. This, of course, horrified abolitionists. And even though our good friend that you see here, okay, William Lloyd Garrison's newspaper, this is an early masthead for the Liberator, one of the great abolitionist newspapers. But I would have you move your eyes to the left. Move your eyes to the left of the masthead, and you will see a slave sale depicted. And inside the circle, you might recognize the building in the background. It is the U.S. Capitol. It is the U.S. Capitol. And yes, folk were sold within eyesight and eye line of the Capitol building, so that it not only did slave couples pass in front of the Capitol, but we have what the English call a gobsmacked reaction in some years before the Civil War for a female reporter who happened to be standing at the backside of the Capitol, and she heard noise coming down Independence Avenue. And she was happening to be standing on a small stand, and her husband was with her, which was a good thing. And he told her to get down and get down quickly. And as the noise came louder and louder toward her, she saw Black men and children and women chained to a log on either side, coming down Independence, probably on their way to the water. She was horrified that this sort of thing could be so open in the capital of the land of the free and the home of the brave. And she asked her husband, how can this go on? How can this occur in so open a nature? And of course, her husband was saying, get down, woman. You're standing on the post. You're standing on where they're going to expose the enslaved people for sale. So get down from there. Well, I think that you should. No, he basically told his wife to shut up because she might be locked up. Just an example of the power of the slaveocracy. This is a segment of an article that appeared in the New York Independent in referring to the frequent separation of families in that city by the sale of slaves, which constantly occur in defiance of law. Remember, they'll tell you today, slave families were not separated, or we didn't sell them. Well, they were lying then, and those who continue to sell that nonsense are lying now. One case of a poor slave girl who attempted to escape to a free state and was recaptured has especially roused the indignation of the enemies of slavery in Washington. She was whipped on the naked back till it was literally raw, and then salt water was poured into the bleeding wounds. Her master, who in person executed the horrible punishment, passes for a gentleman, the reporter writes, and if I mistake not, is a church member. The poor girl was at once sold off to Alabama as soon as her master had wreaked his vengeance upon her for attempting to escape. But for that desire to live free and equal, this is what her mother said to her. How could you try to run away? Asked the old mother of her child after listening to the strokes of the lash as they fell upon her daughter's back. How could you, Mag? I never slept one wink from the hour I missed you till I saw you again. And now master will sell you off the place, and we shall never see you again. The young lady's answer, a simple, I wanted to be free. That was the only excuse the girl could give. The mother herself told me the story amid a storm of sobs and tears. With this being almost daily displayed, it should be no surprise to you then that much focus was put on the slave trade, although it was going on in other places in the country, but there was no disputing the evidence of your own eyes if you walk the streets of the nation's capital. DC was getting a reputation. I found this in the Australian Colonial Literary Journal, November 21st, 1844. A colored man sometime since went to Washington, the capital of that country, which boasts that all men are born free and independent. There he was arrested as a slave. Being fortunately able to disprove that, he was declared a right man, but unable to pay the expenses attendant on his defense. He was actually sold as a slave to make up the amount. And then the article ends rather sarcastically, Hail Columbia, happy land. In our supercharged and climactically careful vision of the mind, we now go to right behind the old Washington courthouse. That is to say, it's built by George Hadfield. You'll know it if you know where Judiciary Square is, if you know where the courthouse where the statue of Lincoln is across from the H. Carl Moultrie Courthouse. This was the site of the Blue Jug. It was the formal name for or informal name for the Washington City Jail. And it was called the Blue Jug because it was painted a hideous shade of blue. Negroes in Washington jail, singular developments, charges of cruelty and kidnapping. And I might add, the jug itself was filthy. It's going to be replaced sometime later by what's there now, which is the Pension Building, the red building that has become the National Building Museum, which has a frieze of marching soldiers about halfway up the side of the building, and it goes around all four sides. But again, this sort of thing, with children in the same fetid conditions as certainly as their mothers, this was a cause célèbre in terms of the slave issue that people simply could not ignore. And trust me, free blacks had a modicum of a slightly better existence. This is the case of Johnson versus Washington. Okay. And it is the attempt by a black woman named Harriet Johnson, rather, a negress, for the fine of keeping a tavern without a license. Okay. This is the strangling aspects of living even as a free black in the nation's capital. You're free, but there's so much you cannot do that other people could do that are adumbrated free. But if your skin is black, no, we might call you that, but it didn't really mean that, not fully. You had to be off the street by 10. You could not pursue any occupation that you wanted to have. And so we have this brave woman who is fighting and who will essentially lose for all intents and purposes. And the court under Judge Cranch was of the opinion that the corporation had a discretion to prohibit the granting of tavern licenses to colored persons. Not quite sure, except for the reason I've already mentioned. If you are free, you should be free of the encumbrances attached to slave people. You're supposed to be free in the eyes of the city government, but that was not the case. And even though this part isn't taught in the DC public schools, it is important that you know so that you can tell the school-age children in your family and those whom you might meet up. We did fight back physically. We did attempt freedom physically in the nation's capital. From the book American Negro Slave Revolts by Herbert Aptheker, both the Georgetown Advocate and the Daily National Intelligencer reported in 1838 that in the District of Columbia, a serious plot arose in May. Armed citizens and regular police patrols came out in force, arrested several slaves and a few white men, and broke up some infamous dens in which the scheme had been hatched. There was another attempt even earlier, certainly in Georgetown, at least in 1802, from John Barnes to Thomas Jefferson. And this is from the papers of Thomas Jefferson. Sir, Dateline, Georgetown, 24 September 1802, respecting late rumors, the rising of the Negroes here, it has subsided. A few patrols and other necessary precautions have guarded against any fatal consequences which might have otherwise ensued. The most probable conjectures are whites and blacks whose sole business is plunder would at a fit opportunity have set fire to some distant building while they plundered others in the confused state of the town. You can't afford to throw that away as a possible conclusion, because I remember reading something years ago connected to David Crockett when he was in Congress, and how people thought that if they saw flames coming up from places like Georgetown, that the most likely culprit were freedom-seeking blacks, although they had other words of description for them. The second letter from Daniel Brent to James Madison. John Barnes and Daniel Brent were famous people from this particular federal period. They knew everyone that needed to be known in order to get things done in the nation's capital. Dateline, Washington, September 21st, 1802. Dear sir, you will probably hear of the alarm which prevailed in Georgetown on Friday night last from the discovery of a supposed design on the part of its Negroes to burn down the town, and of the very serious measures that were taken to prevent the execution of this design. In arming the militia and keeping them all night on guard, a few worthless fellows have been committed to prison. And Mr. J.T. Mason has actually sold the reputed leader of the party to some Georgia men. The alarm, I believe, has entirely ceased. Well, we don't know if he actually believed it, but he certainly hoped that the alarm had been largely seized. This is the hidden history, and why our children don't know that we fought back. I'll let y'all speculate on it, but you do have to tell them that it wasn't only Nat Turner and VZ and Gabriel, but even here in this region, there were black folk who fought back. And if they could not set fire to a building, well, they went by their feet. I give you now an advertisement for $200 reward. Ran away from the subscriber last night, a mulatto man named Frank Mullen, about 21 years old, 5 feet 10 or 11 inches high. He wears his hair long at the sides and top, close behind, and keeps it nicely combed. Now, bear in mind that there were black folk who might be enslaved, who might not have a legal right under the city ordinances, but they had enough humanity that they still then and now, wanted to look good, no matter what their conditions. And so good brother Frank Mullen, who wears his hair long at the sides and top, close behind, and keeps it nicely combed. Rather thick lips, mild countenance, polite when spoken to, and very genteel in his person. His clothing consists of a variety of summer and winter articles, among which are stay with me on this, a blue cloth coat and blue castanet coatee, small coat, y'all, white pantaloons, blue cloth, so forth, a pair of new ribbed castanets, a blue Boston wrapper, it's a longer coat, with velvet collar, several black hats, boots, and shoes. Now, Brother Man was going to look good when he got the freedom. I don't think there's any question about that. As he has absconded without any provocation. How ironic, how insulting, how self-deluding. He went off without provocation. Whippings, rapes, murders. No, they weren't as far as these people were concerned. It is presumed that he will make for Pennsylvania or New York. I will give $100 if taken in the state of Maryland, or the above reward if taken anywhere east of that state and secured so that I can get him again. And all reasonable expenses paid if brought home to the subscriber living in the city of Washington. Thomas C. Scott, October 21st, 1835. And of course, the best known of the escape attempts occurred in 1848 and involved a situation at the Georgetown waterfront involving Mary and Emily Edmondson. For those of you who have an interest in the doings of the Underground Railroad locally, I encourage you to go to 1701 Duke Street in Old Town Alexandria. You will see what is now a beautiful metal statue in honor of Mary and Emily Edmondson and their adventure on the Pearl. On the Pearl. And by the way, that small brick building across from what some people call Edmondson Plaza is the Bruin slave pen. So right in Old Town Alexandria, you have two slave pens still standing about 4 blocks from each other. 1315 Duke Street is one. That's the Franklin Armfield slave prison. And if you feel energetic, walk 4 blocks up toward the 1700 block on the same side of the street, and you will see the statue of the Pearl. That was the name of the ship that they attempted to escape on. Unfortunately, they did not make it. But these constant, if you will, like pearls on black velvet, these constant flare-ups of and strong desire and intention of black folk in the nation's capital to be free didn't stop. It may have slowed from time to time, but they did not stop. And then in the late 1840s, 1849 to be precise, a young freshman congressman from Illinois came along thinking he had the answer. Yes, Abraham Lincoln, Abe Lincoln of Illinois, proposed a bill to abolish slavery in the District of Columbia more than a decade before it finally would. And he never forgot it, even though he was persuaded by the reactions of the people in political power when he mentioned this proposal. And so he dropped it. But he did not forget the proposal. And so we begin to see, perhaps at a distance, that the idea of compensated emancipation stays somewhere in the back of his mind. Comes now 1862. The conflagration in Charleston Harbor at a place called Fort Sumter. Now it's a shooting war. Now it begins. And we're looking at 1861 and 1862. We get the kind of reaction that many people had prayed for. But please understand that we had wanted to fight for our freedom. This young man that you're looking at, young unidentified African American sailor, is a reminder that Black men were allowed to enlist in the Union Navy in September, as early as September of 1861. Our children had the freedom bug as well, and they were willing to put their lives on the line to demonstrate it. And with wrangling and backroom deals, we finally get emancipation in district in a process that was in no wise automatic, no wise guaranteed, but it took the dedication of several influential people, of course, among them Abraham Lincoln, who signed the document, and dedicated congressmen and senators. This is the act for the release of certain persons held to service or labor in the District of Columbia. Has this day been approved and signed? Lincoln, he felt that it could be done because he believed that Congress had the constitutional authority to abolish slavery in the city. And so he went forward with that. There are still reports of how perhaps some friends of his, and I write about this in my book on the Black Civil War Regiment from the District of Columbia. Some people got advance notice and were able to move some of their freedom-seeking Black folk out of the city. But it would ultimately result in freedom for approximately 3,000 people. It would be the only instance of compensated emancipation in the history of the United States. I believe that the ultimate success of DC emancipation made Lincoln and other pro-emancipation politicians and their supporters more willing to take the risk of moving it and moving the concept of emancipation forward. Because with emancipation in the district, April 16th, 1861, by the way, in case you're looking at exactly when that occurred in the nation's capital, take a look at the bottom of the article entitled Emancipation in the District of Columbia. There you will see at the bottom right, Abraham Lincoln's signature, and bottom left, Washington, April 16th, 1862. Well, there were people who knew in advance it was going to happen. Many people were still thunderstruck that this actually would happen, and it actually went down in a place that was not averse to slavery. But the Republicans had a stout crew of people who understood that this was at a cost, even to America's soul. And this is an article from a Pennsylvania newspaper from a couple of days before, giving you an idea of what's coming down the pipe. The bill provided for the payment of $300 a head to the owner of each slave emancipated, with certain restrictions, and appropriates $100,000 toward the colonization as are willing to leave the country. You must understand that when it came to DC emancipation, they did not want us to stay here. We might be free, but they did not want us to stay here. Sometimes that's not well known. You might know about the compensated emancipation, but $100,000 was set toward the colonization of such as are willing to leave the country. It's clear, because it's not taught much in the schools in the nation's capital, that people are also bereft of the importance of DC emancipation. And so I submit for your perusal an article from the London Times that was reprinted in the New York Times. Neither Englishmen nor Frenchmen have been forward to recognize the fact that the 16th of April, 1862 was a day which will stand in American history as the greatest day since that of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The day of this century which will be honored through all time, whatever may be the destiny in store for the Republic. On that day, the people of the United States ceased to be a slaveholding nation. Till then, there had been a gulf fixed between them and all those Christian nations which had outgrown the barbarism of holding men as slaves. And now the nation had come over to the side on which we stand, referring to Great Britain. Great Britain had in the 1830s done away with slavery. And by this time, France had as well. It is now entitled to act and speak as a free nation should. It is now qualified to act with us without misgiving and without hypocrisy against the slave trade. It is no longer a subject for the skepticism and scorn of the world because of the contrast between its profession and its practice. It has abolished slavery on the national territory, and the national government has ceased to be a slaveholding power. Slavery has sunk to be a mere state institution and deprived of national sanction and support, and exposed as it is now to the condemnation of the American government together with all other governments. It cannot long sustain itself under the scorn and loathing of human society. As a national institution, it could assume to defy foreign opinion. As a domestic institution, reprobated at Washington as in London and Paris, its doom is plain and its strength is broken. And when we talk about the celebrations that occurred in the wake of Juneteenth, let us also be aware that there was celebration in the wake of DC Emancipation. As a matter of fact, what you're looking at is an article from 1865 on the Negro celebration at Washington. They're referring to DC Emancipation, the last year of the Civil War, and the big coming together occurred in a place that many of you, if you know anything about DC, now know well. Franklin Square or Franklin Park, just off of 15th Street Northwest. For many years, DC Emancipation, one of my colleagues calls the folks in DC the first freed, was observed. Here is a description of DC Emancipation from 1936. That's quite a distance from 1862 to 1936. Judge Armand W. Scott of Municipal Court was the principal speaker last night at the annual exercises in celebrating emancipation of slaves in the District of Columbia, held in Calvary Parish Hall and under the auspices of the Negro Association of Oldest Inhabitants. DC, what it was in 1936 and for many years prior to that time, was cleaved by the Jim Crow. And so there was a Black organization of oldest inhabitants and a white organization of oldest inhabitants. The white organization still exists today, and they have a much more accommodating attitude. DC Emancipation also set in motion the beginning of the organization of Black men who wished to serve in the Army coming from Washington, D.C. And that's what you're looking at now. It was my great honor to write the first book ever on the African American regiment from the nation's capital. The name of the book is Black, Copper, and Bright. But we're not done. The process of emancipation is galloping on. So let me tell you where we are as of right now. We have the successful emancipation of Black folk in the District of Columbia. That's April 1862. In September of 1862, we have the preliminary emancipation nationally. Now, what this is it's a get ready, get set, go. Lincoln is telling the folk, I got even bigger things coming down the pike. Prepare yourselves. Get ready for it. And so Maryland in November of 1864 is going to free its enslaved people to the number of more than 80,000. Virginia, 1864, that same year that Maryland is freed by a change to its constitution, is going to begin the tangled process of setting free the Black folk in Virginia. But that's not going to be easy. It will be multiple steps. We have to have a Virginia Constitutional Convention. That's April 1864. The state of Virginia is going to split into West Virginia and Virginia itself. So we have the writhings and twistings of a state that is of two minds for a time. But that will be put right in December of 1865. This is what I mean. Virginia's restored government and Alexandria, the restored government of Virginia. After Virginia seceded in the spring of 1861, Unionists met in Wheeling, West Virginia, what would come to be Wheeling, West Virginia, and organized a state government loyal to the U.S. under Governor Francis H. Pierpont. What was called the restored government, which sent representatives to the U.S. Congress and raised federal troops, moved to Alexandria in August 1863. Pierpont was based at the City Hotel. That's the old Gadsby's Tavern. Before moving to 415 Prince Street in Alexandria. The General Assembly, representing Northern Virginia, the Eastern Shore, and Hampton Roads, met at City Hall. Members authorized a convention that adopted Virginia's Constitution of 1864, which abolished slavery and secured other reforms. The government moved to Richmond in May of 1865, and its constitution was in effect until 1869. Now we go to Texas. Texas was designed by the slave owners that controlled aspects of its operation as the last great frontier of slavery, in what would become the largest state of the Union. Now, we should know, of course, that it had been a territory, a province, if you will, of Mexico. But it's about to be carved out of Mexico and essentially taken over by the slave power in the United States. So what had been once known as the República de Texas will be slid in almost on a grease slide to get it into the United States quickly and smoothly. First, there is the issue of annexation, the re-annexation of Texas. Do we take it in? There were people who said, wait a minute, we're talking about 268,000 square miles. Well, the people that were in favor of Texas becoming a state saw in the back of their brains 268,000 square miles of waving cotton. They saw a South not reproduced in miniature, but a South writ large. The Republic of Texas, that now sues for admission into the American Union, skirts on the one side the southern line of the United States, and on the other stretches along the expanded frontier of Mexico. The climate of this last named country is the most favorable of the whole globe for the development of the Negro race. Well, that's special, to say the least. And they claimed that the climate was more salubrious even than Africa, with a soil more spontaneously productive. There and in Central America and in the vast regions further south. The Negro is already a freeman, socially as well as politically, the equal of the white. 9/10 of the population there is made up of colored races. The generals, the congressmen, the presidents are of mixed blood. Let the emancipated Negro find himself on the borders of Mexico and the states beyond, and his fate is no longer doubtful or gloomy. Here is the land of his fellows where equal rights and equal hopes await him and his offspring. I shouldn't have to tell y'all that that's a pack of lies, because the slave owners taking over Texas are not going to tolerate men and women, grown men and women, who have the desire to taste freedom for themselves and for their progeny. But anything to sell it once you get going. The issue about Texas, how it would come in the Union, to a lesser extent, even California, which will do so in 1850, has been on the minds of many people, certainly as far back as the preceding decade. What you're looking at is an 1844 cartoon of a slave awaits the outcome of the great prize fight, matching the American eagle against Spanish and British contenders, with Texas and California the prize. The spirit of Washington is floating over all this, looking down upon it and encouraging the Texas Republic. So we see, looking at from left to right, we have Spain, we have the eagle, and in his nest are eggs called Texas and California. If we look at the Union forever, okay, that is the intention of most of the Americans. But John Bull, this is the image that represents England as much as Uncle Sam represented the United States. He's looking at that as well. He's got Canada by this time. He wouldn't mind expanding his reign. And so we have two alligators threatening the Texas and California. And then we have Brother Man with his head in his hands, because he understands that none of these, with the possible exception of Great Britain, mean him any good. The anti-annexation is perhaps best personified by the people who said if Texas comes into the Union, it will be seen as a bigger pen to cram slaves into. That is indeed the idea, and that is indeed what happened. People like Frederick Douglass were against annexation, but there were other people who wanted to see slavery and the slave trade expanded, indeed, even into other parts of the hemisphere. But in rapid time, the worst features of slavery in the Deep South are going to be replicated in what had been formerly non-slaveholding Mexican territory. So already by 1849, we have a sale of Louise for owner's back taxes, July 25th, 1849. And according to this Harris County document, C.W. Bassett owned the magnificent sum of $2.40 in back taxes. But the tax assessor seized his property. And what did he have as property? One Negro girl named Louise, about 10 years old, enslaved for life, and offered her for sale at public auction to pay the taxes. There were no bidders, but she was published by the state for $5.90. They don't know what happened to her. Auctions went on. They went on. Auction sale by A.C. McKean and Company, Wednesday, August 19th. 30 valuable Georgia Negroes, Henry, 26 years old, engineer and teamster, Marriott, his wife, cook, washer, and ironer, William, 18, very likely field hand and houseboy, General, 17, very likely and handy at all work. Likely meaning they're easy on the eyes. There's a handsome, good-looking folk. Manda, 30, number one cook, Lively, 31, large and splendid fellow. Sam, 50, his wife Amy, 24 years, and 4 children, 11, 8, 5 years, and an infant, a splendid plantation family. George, 15, field hand, likely. Emmeline, 30, good cook, washer, and ironer. Mary, 15, very likely home servant. We also have several other Negroes on hand, if not sold at private sale, will be sold that day. The title of the Negroes are from responsible parties and are indisputable. The Houston Telegraph, August 19th, 1863. This is yet perhaps another good reason why it is not good to claim that slavery ended with Juneteenth, if you look at the date. But Black folk fighting back, fighting for freedom, justice, and equality, fought back in old ways and new. We have the Underground Railroad, if you will, in Texas, in Fannin County. At least the Black folk were running out of there trying to get into Mexico, we believe. The sheriff's notice, committed to the jail of Caldwell County, a runaway slave, a Negro man about 6 feet high, about 23 years of age, dark. He says his name is Julius, and he belongs to Henry Dance of Brazoria County. The owner will please come forward and prove said Negro, pay charges, and take him away, or he will be dealt with according to law, which is he's most likely to be sold. Taken up and committed to the possession of the undersigned sheriff of Young County, Texas, on the 4th day of September 18, I believe that may be 56 or 36, who says her name is Maria, further says she belongs to Mrs. Burley of Clarkborough Parish, Louisiana, said slave was a mulatto, 20 years of age, weighs about 150 pounds, says she left the house of Mr. Solomon, where she was hired, and sometime in the month of June, through the persuasion of a white man named James Rand. The owner or owners of said slave are requested to come forward, prove property, pay charges, and take her away, or she will be dealt with according to law. Finally, for our purposes, runaway, committed to jail in Bastrop County on the 4th of August, 1855 by T.H. Mays, J.P., a Negro man who says his name is Peter, aged about 50 years, dark complexion, 5 feet 8 or 9 inches high, says he belongs to Horatio Hearn of Robertson County, Texas. The owner is requested to come forward, prove property, and pay charges, and take him away, or he will be dealt with according to law. Then there is the issue of whether or not there was arson that took place in Texas. Here are 2 articles that I found describing arson, but there are still some historians who, well, we're not sure if that actually took place. And yet, when you look at the amount of detail, it's hard for reasonable people to doubt that Black folks doing what they had done in so many other slaveholding states set fire to master's property. For sale, 400 likely African Negroes lately landed upon the coast of Texas. Said Negroes will be sold upon the most reasonable terms. 1/3 down, the remainder in 1 and 2 years with a 3% interest. For further information, inquire of KCK Houston or LRG in Galveston. Galveston was a slave trading port. Some people are surprised to find that Texas is listed in the Emancipation Proclamation. That had been Lincoln's intention. Life had other plans. This is best explained, I think, with this selection from the book entitled The Governor's Hounds, the Texas State Police, 1870 to 1873. During the course of the Civil War, Texas had never been successfully invaded. Isolated from the fighting Texans evinced a sense of invincibility at the conclusion of the conflict. A Northerner stated that Texas was never whipped in spirit, only nominally whipped. They considered themselves to simply have been found in bad company. The writer Thomas North observed that white Texans seriously considered the proposition that the state could carry on the war by herself and alone win what the whole South failed to achieve together. Those who believe this foolish notion, a mixed class of the lower sort, North wrote, did not accept the situation in good faith, have not yet, and never will, so long as they can keep the waters muddy. So for those of you who thought that Texas was going to surrender a source of profit, privilege, and pride, no, it soon became clear that the Union Army would have to land forces in the state to set things right. And so it does. And General Granger brings sizable forces, members of the U.S. colored troops with him. General Jackson's command of colored troops has reached Texas safely and disembarked. General Granger assumes command in Texas. New Orleans, January 18th, Major General Weitzel and his staff arrived here at 5 o'clock p.m. on Friday on the steamer Crescent from Fortress Monroe and left for Brazos, Santiago at 10 the following morning. Let me just say, Brazos, Santiago was a Union fortification on the extreme eastern edge of Texas. In fact, there were black troops in Brazos, Santiago before those who were assigned to travel with General Gordon Granger. General Custer and his staff arrived here yesterday. They will leave today for Alexandria, whence they will march with the Cavalry Corps, which has been concentrated at that point into Texas. General Granger has assumed command of all the troops in Texas and will issue the following order. This is General Gordon Granger. And at the headquarters district of Texas in Galveston on June 19, 1865, he issued General Order Number 3. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with the proclamation from the executive of the United States, and here he's referring to the Emancipation Proclamation, all slaves are free. Now understand, he's referring to what? Texas. This involves an absolute equality of rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and a free laborer. The freedmen are advised to remain at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or anywhere else. So General Granger is not playing. Well, what did it mean to the people, the black folk in Texas? From the book, My Master, The Inside Story of Sam Houston and His Times by his former slave, Jeff Hamilton. Brother Hamilton writes, it was not until June 19th, 1865, the year of the surrender, that General Gordon Granger of the United States Army issued a proclamation freeing all the Negro slaves in Texas. So you see, the 19th day of June is the day the colored people in Texas celebrate as their 4th of July. Everybody in Texas, both black and white, call the day the Juneteenth, just as one says the 4th. And the title of the holiday is actually what's called a portmanteau. It is a slamming together of two separate words. For example, if you are familiar, and I know you are, with the word motel, motel is another portmanteau. It is the slamming together of motor and hotel. the thing about Gordon Granger and how he pulled this off is he was able, by force of arms and threat of arms, to show the serious intent of the Union to back up the freedom of some 200,000 people. Now, I know you'll immediately say, well, wait a minute. The census of 1860 says 182,000 and change. But please understand that slave owners from other parts of the South had been bringing their enslaved property to the Deep South, attempting, we now know for the most part, vainly, to keep them out of the hands of the free people and the Union Army. That this occurred, we know from other sources. The brother of Frederick Douglass, Perry Downs, said very clearly he wasn't going where his master wanted him to go. And so he says that he wasn't going anywhere near water because he knew that his master was going to take him, told him to his face, I'll take you to Cuba to keep you away from your freedom. And there would be other examples of this when Juneteenth occurred. There was another gentleman who was told by his master, listen, I'll pay you $1 a month and you stay working for me. But if you don't, I'll kill you. And the only way that brother got free was his master was killed himself some months later. There were people who did not want us to be free at all in Texas. There's another young lady named Tempe Cummings, her mother, and she were on a plantation, and her mother had the habit of listening at the corner of the cabin, and she overheard her master say that the black people were free. And she also heard him tell his wife, I'm not going to tell them. We need them to put in another crop. So suggesting he might tell the black folk there, he might later, but they're going to put a crop in first. And I remember finding, and I have in another lecture, the story of a man who showed up at Eagle Pass, Texas, on the border, and he wanted to know if black people were free. Brothers and sisters, the problem was he asked the question in 1903. He had been left up in the air, his freedom uncertain to him. And so that's quite a while to go, not knowing what your freedom is all about. But be careful and don't rush into the conclusion that none of us knew that freedom had come to Texas. I introduce to you now one of the great writers of the African American condition, and her name was Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. In her best known work, the book called Iola Leroy, the first chapter, she sets you and explains to you what she calls the mystery of market speech. And she gives examples of how that in order for black people to stay up on what was going on the war, black people invented a code language, which Frances Ellen Watkins Harper describes. She gives an example of the following: two black folk meeting in the market. One of them says to the other, how's the eggs today? Oh man, the eggs are fine. How about the butter? Man, the eggs and butter are wonderful, wonderful. Well, that was all code to let one of the other people know that that there had been Union victories on the battlefield and that things were going well in the cause of freedom. And let us not forget. And I've heard the stories, y'all. You know, we oh they sent the message on passenger pigeons from the east, but somebody ate the passenger pigeons, which is why they didn't find out for 3 years. Highly unlikely, brothers and sisters. Highly unlikely. Or when you consider that black folk were not cut off entirely, there were newspapers, steamboats, and a telegraph. So there were ways to find out. In fact, the great American novelist Sinclair Lewis used one of those type of tactics in one of his books called King's Blood Royal, about how a black person kept current on what was going on in his situation. So please don't necessarily write our ancestors off without knowing. True, it's clear that many of them did not know that they were free, but those who had access or were trying to get access, oh, to a newspaper, they were overlooked, they were listening to conversations. And what did I mention? The newspaper and the telegraph. So these were powerful ways that people could stay up with the changes in the war. Not available to everyone, but we know that we shared good information with those we felt we could trust. And understand that slavery existed after Juneteenth. I give you this selection from the Bedford, Pennsylvania Inquirer, August 27th, 1865. So this is months after Juneteenth. And it says that New Jersey, Kentucky, and Delaware refused to ratify the anti-slavery amendment of the Constitution. Y'all, that would be the 13th Amendment. So that were still places that you could go. We know, for example, Kentucky had thousands of enslaved people well after Juneteenth in Texas. Here's another example, dated December 13th, 1865. Manumission of Frank by Thomas Hubbard and Robert Blank of Kent County, Delaware. Yes, tiny Delaware. For that matter, tiny New Jersey. But that may be a story for another time. This document was executed less than a week before the ratification of the 13th Amendment ending slavery in the United States. Slavery had continued to exist in both Delaware and Kentucky until that time. But then that time comes. Even Virginia falls under the sway of the ratification of the 13th Amendment. This is an image, a scene in the House of the passage of the 13th, the proposition to amend the Constitution in terms of the 13th Amendment, which I might point out to you did not initially pass. There were people who still wanted to continue enslavement of black people. But now, and with the expected ratification, although enough was done to pass it in Congress, there were still places that did not sign off until the 20th century. In the years and months beyond Juneteenth, we hear even more about the legends of the Black Cowboys, one of which was part of the inspiration for one of the greatest Western movies ever made. And here I'm talking about The Searchers with John Wayne. You see, the author, Alan LeMay, did his research and looked at people who had spent years tracking down Native Americans who had kidnapped white folk. And Britt Johnson, brother's name was Britt Johnson, he did that. He would later be killed, but he was successful. And Alan LeMay, the script writer for The Searchers, was aware of the work, the story of Britt Johnson. Black women with their usual energy and purpose began to form schools. Here are three graduates from the Caroline Bishop Training School from Dallas, Texas. Bishop College was founded by the Baptist Home Mission Society in 1881 in Marshall, Texas. Nathan Bishop and his wife, Carolyn Caldwell Bishop, gave money and land to start the school. From the school's inception, there were ties between it and Black Baptist in Dallas. In 1947, the school opened a junior college branch in Dallas. The same year, it began a graduate master's in education program. These sisters were not playing. But the mere fact of having a Juneteenth celebration was in itself an act of liberation for far too long in the state of Texas. Texas does not officially embrace Juneteenth until 1980. In the meantime, Black men, women, and children are burned at the stake. They are lynched time and time again. Yes, that's happening all over the South. And we tend to attach only the good vibes to Juneteenth. But let's remind ourselves that we're talking about a deadly serious activity to strike at the very heart of any kind of legal equality. The state of Texas did not approve Black marriages, legalize Black marriages until 5 years after Juneteenth, until 1870, believing that if we give them the right to marry, they'll want the right to vote. If we give them the right to serve on juries, they'll want still more. So we're going to stop them, even with getting married. And understand, many people in Texas consider themselves Bible bouncing, psalm singing Christians. But we continue to have a gay day. We continue to have a happy day, and they began to grow. There would be some years where it might lack the enthusiasm or the dispersal, but for the by and large, Black folk got happy. And one of the first stories that we hear about a description of Juneteenth happening, and one brother said on his plantation, hallelujah broke out all over. And for me, as we get toward the end of the presentation, this is a flyer announcing a Juneteenth bash. 19th of June at Emancipation Park. Good music during the day, amusements for the children. We cordially invite the citizens of Austin and Travis County to come out and help us enjoy the 19th of June at this beautiful park owned and controlled by colored people. Can you imagine people who had been enmeshed in bondage being able to proudly say, we're going to hold something for Black people on land that we own? And then they said, we especially invite all of the old ex-slaves to come out. Why? Because they wanted testimony. Many of our Jewish brothers and sisters often arrange to have Holocaust survivors speak to the people of the current generation so that they can hear from those who survived, who went through it and are still with us, because there is a special strength to people who survived and can tell their stories. And of course, the connection between that and today, y'all know Black folk are coming out for a free barbecue and basket dinner. You already know that. That'll work today in the 21st century. Dinner will be served to everybody at 4 o'clock. There is a program that begins with songs and prayers and scripture readings and sermons, and Black women have a singular role in these proceedings. People even dressed up for Juneteenth. And some stores, white-owned stores, were smart enough to see that happen and get a piece of the action. So if you want to dress up for Juneteenth, the Texas Dry Goods Store, and they were delivered to any place in Texas, but they were, I believe, based in Dallas. Dress up for Juneteenth at the Savings Store. They got lovely dresses. They got special shoe values. They got real millinery values. Fabric at 65 cents a yard. Children's suits at $4. They took frivolity to a new level of solemnity. Here's another poster. 1865, 54th anniversary, 1919, Thursday and Friday. In this particular instance, at Herman's Park in Fort Worth, what have they done? They've gone to 2 days. Herman's Park in Fort Worth, Texas. The barbecue will be under the management of Mr. I believe that's D.C. Crook. Bring your basket and enjoy as old-time Juneteenth dinner. As I said, y'all, that'll work today as well as back then. How about this? 1923, Juneteenth, Emancipation celebration at the Emancipation Park. All right. Fine music by Masonic Brass Band. A program and entertainment committee that was very important. They played sports. They had free games galore, music, mirth, merriment, and of course, they thank God Almighty as the source of their blessing. Over time, there began to be a favorite drink. Now, initially, newly freed Black folk had made strawberry soda, lemonade, and those things. But by the 1940s, many of the festivities have their thirsts were quaffed by this. Not a black made drink, but still used in Juneteenth ceremonies today. Big Red. What I can tell you is that I spoke at a corporate event some years ago, and they shipped in Big Red soda for their Juneteenth celebration, and it was good. But you know, if you want something that is healthful, Big Red probably may not be your best choice, but it's part of the legend of Juneteenth celebrations in many places. Here is the man that gave us the smartness, the strategy to make Juneteenth a legal holiday in Texas. Born in 1937, we're talking about the Honorable Albert Edwards. And he believed in the history of this celebration. He was deeply involved with local issues, and he thought this would be a good thing to be done. And so he was able to put together a coalition of people who believed in what he was trying to do. And so Texas finally acknowledged the force of Mr. Edwards' lobbying, and Juneteenth became a legal holiday in Texas. Well, we're done, but I want to show you one of the tangible things that the celebration of Juneteenth has done over the past 160 years. It's caused the erection of the Texas African American History Memorial. And this is on the Capitol grounds at Austin, Texas. And it tells the history of a people in a series of panels and plaques executed, yes, by a man with a unique vision and pedigree. The first Black man to go into, be accepted into the astronaut training program. Look him up. I'll leave that with you as my final question, but you should be aware of him because he's still sculpting today. That's one of the hints. Okay. One of his works is in Washington, D.C. He executed a statue of Frederick Douglass, which is in the Frederick Douglass Visitor Center at the foot of Cedar Hill, the Douglass residence. What I've tried to do today, and one other thing, please notice on the, dare I say, prow of the statuary group is the word emancipation. What I tried to do today is to share with you some information to let you know that the fight for the sanctity and safety of Juneteenth is as important now as it was in 1865. That our ancestors had to go through a lot to get it. They're going to have to go through a lot to keep it because, unlike many places, even Maryland's Freedom Day is November the 1st, 1864, but it's not quite celebrated as earnestly as it was. In Maryland, there were at least two places that I know of straight off that celebrated Maryland Emancipation Day. And that, again, November the 1st, 1864, because of a change to the state constitution. But were they wonderful blessings that went on all throughout the state. And what was Maryland's name? The Free State. It would be emancipation in the state of Maryland that would make it free. And so places as close as Laurel celebrated Maryland Emancipation Day for many years, and a handful of other places as well. The next time you're on your way to the beaches on the shores of Maryland, you're going to, and you're on Route 50, I believe it's called the Ocean Gateway. Some miles before you get to Cambridge, you'll go through the tiny town of Trappe, Maryland. Trappe, 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 Maryland. They still have the celebration related to emancipation, Maryland style. And they have it in a place called Scott's Church. Scott's, if you decide to look at it. Again, it's only a one stoplight community off of Route 50. So don't go too fast or you might miss it. Another name for that celebration is Uncle Nace's Day. Uncle Nace's Day for a man named Nathaniel Hopkins, who had been a critical support in terms of making Uncle Nace's Day a reality. Look him up if you can. We do need to let more people know about Uncle Nace's Day, about Maryland Emancipation Day. But at least in that tiny town on Route 50, they still celebrate Maryland Emancipation Day. So we all have those special days, whether it's in Texas, in Washington, D.C., in Virginia, they used to celebrate it on January 1st. But they had them. They acknowledged them. Can we do less? Thank you all. Have a good evening. And I'll